And so this idea of the five senses with vision or seeing is the beautiful opportunity. Although sometimes it's challenging, right? Because we have to look at the messy and maybe some of the dysfunction, and maybe there might be some pain or sorrow there, but we actually get to face, we get to turn our attention, our vision to what's really happening. And it's so beautiful because then we can start to explore, how do I create the life I want and deserve? And so our vision for this beautiful, bright future is so enhanced when we let go of alcohol.
Welcome to the Sober Edge podcast, inspiration for alcohol-free living. I'm your host, Teri Patterson, functional nutritionist and This Naked Mind senior coach. The Sober Edge is a place to explore the infinite possibilities on the other side of drinking. In a culture soaked in booze, discover the wonder and joy of taking a different path. Meet real people living lives of purpose and passion. Learn the truth behind the alcohol myths and get ready to be motivated, inspired, and astounded by what is possible with the Sober Edge.
Well, hey everyone, it's Teri back with another edition of the Sober Edge podcast, and I am delighted to be with you today. And we are going to take a deep dive into coming to our senses alcohol-free. So I always love to share my real life experiences with you as my listeners as part of how I decide, what I want to bring to you and what's important on this alcohol-free journey. What might we want to know? And so what's been in my peripheral vision and my radar recently is the idea of our five senses. And first, this came about because for the Sober Edge Book Club, we are reading this month Life in Five Senses by Gretchen Rubin. And if you have followed me for any length of time, you know that Gretchen Rubin is one of my favorite authors. She is truly, interesting and on point, and I find her work fascinating, and she's humorous as well. So I've been wanting to read this book for a long time, and we chose it for this month's book club for the Sober Edge Book Club. And by the way, if you're interested in finding out more about the Sober Edge Book Club and joining our community, I will pop that in the show notes. So as we have been reading this book, I've been thinking about what alcohol does to our senses, our five senses. And I want to share a little bit about that today. Also, I recently saw the play Sense and Sensibility, and I thought this is hilarious because as I'm thinking about senses, I saw that play. And of course, it's talking about common sense and sensibility. And so I hope you will enjoy this conversation around the through line between senses, sensibility, common sense, alcohol-free living, and what we know about our five senses. So today I want to touch on two things. The first is going to be physically how our senses are impacted when we are drinking and over drinking. So we know that all of our body systems are impacted by the toxin alcohol. So I'm going to break down just a little bit about the five senses and what alcohol use does to impact our five senses. And then I want to talk more about the figurative idea of coming to our senses, where our five senses of see, hear, smell, touch, taste can be enhanced by considering this alcohol-free journey, whether you're taking a break or this is a lifelong commitment. So let's get started. So first of all, I wanted to just share how our five senses are impacted by alcohol. And you may already know that, one of the most impacted parts of our body is our taste. So alcohol actually dulls our taste buds and it impacts our ability to fully taste and enjoy flavors in food. And, it does this by dulling the vagus nerve, which creates some of those feel-good sensations. And that's one of the mechanisms. And also it's fascinating when we think about this because many of us were sold a bill of goods basically by the alcohol industry that, wine pairings or, a certain wine could enhance the flavor of food. But in fact, the opposite is true. Alcohol dulls our taste buds. It, numbs our sense of taste and it can impact our sense of smell, which is very much connected to taste. So we actually have a reduced ability to detect and distinguish odors. And this is amazing, right? Because we think that alcohol really isn't impacting much. But the reality is, it is a neurotoxin to the brain. And so all of our senses are going to be impacted by drinking. When it comes to hearing, alcohol can affect our auditory system, which can lead to impaired hearing and difficulty processing sounds. One of the things to think about if you've ever been in a loud environment and you have that first drink and you're noticing how loud it is, the second or third drink, suddenly the sensation of sound is diminished and it doesn't seem so noisy. And that's just one example of how hearing is impacted on a regular basis when we're drinking. When we think about touch, alcohol can dull our sense of touch, making us less sensitive to sensations and can potentially affect fine motor skills. It also impacts our balance. And so, again, this is because our cerebellum is impacted. So, coordination, balance, and imagine someone stumbling around, if this has ever been you or someone you've watched, and then they're reaching out to touch things, but they have less sensation. And if you've ever woken up with a bruise or maybe a laceration, a small laceration that you touched something, you didn't have that impact of it when you were inebriated. You can kind of see how touch can be an important part of how alcohol affects our senses. And vision is really interesting because we see that we actually can impair the eye muscle function, which leads to coordination, blurred vision, difficulty focusing. I think we've all either experienced sort of that double vision that comes with over drinking, or we've seen it depicted in the media or in films. And so it can impact our depth perception. And for long term with vision, they actually found that you have a 20% increase in age related macular degeneration with alcohol use disorder. And so this is really powerful to think about. Life in Five Senses, when Gretchen Rubin writes about it, she's talking about how we can notice more and be more in touch and live a more vibrant life when we're really in touch with our five senses. And so I just couldn't help but draw the connection between using alcohol and our impaired senses and what happens when we stop drinking alcohol. How can we notice again the beauty of the world? And that is something that I want to talk about. And then I want to talk about it a little bit more figuratively. So if we think about it, one of the things that many people notice when they stop drinking alcohol, perhaps in the first 30, 60 days, their taste buds come back. And it's fascinating because we don't notice what is happening when we're drinking alcohol because our taste buds just slowly deaden over time. It's kind of like the frog in the pot of boiling water. The frog who is in the pot and the water is turned up slowly, slowly, slowly. We don't notice until suddenly the frog doesn't notice suddenly the water's boiling. And that's sort of what happens with our senses and alcohol. And so certainly we can notice an improved sense of taste and a delight with more foods as we let go of alcohol and the impacts of alcohol are leaving our brain and body. And so certainly the same is true with smell. We might have an enhanced sense of smell. Again, this is also related to taste. And so we start to be more hyper aware of the way things smell, noticing that sensation. we're just not numbed out. Our brain isn't it isn't in that slow process that happens when we drink. And so we're able to connect smells with our surroundings in a new way. And then hearing, how powerful it is to notice that maybe part of what I thought was hearing loss or, some trend toward hearing loss was again just the fact that my prefrontal cortex, my cerebellum, was operating at a slow pace. And so cognitively, I wasn't hearing as well. And this might be true for you too. And certainly when it comes to touch, just having more spatial awareness and not being out of, dizzy or stumbling or off balance. Some people have reported to me that they felt like they were uncoordinated. And when they stopped drinking alcohol, they notice a return to their previous coordination. So many things are heightened when we take away the toxin of alcohol, and certainly our vision as well. So, all really powerful reasons to consider taking a short term, long term, or permanent break from alcohol. And then, kind of turning toward what I was thinking about earlier and wanted to share today is just the idea of, what happens to us when we start to see again. And what I mean by that is when we start to notice our surroundings in new ways, and we might actually see some of the dysfunction that was created by alcohol. And we might see for the first time in a long time some of the chaos that has been driving our life or even happening in the background. And what I realize when I work with people and when I think back on my own journey, I wasn't aware of how much I was not seeing. I was using alcohol in order to allow myself that distance between what was really happening in my life. And so I was intentionally, and maybe some of you are like this too, I was intentionally numbing and disassociating from some of the painful parts of my life. And so as we move away from alcohol, one of the things we notice is that it can be a little bit jarring to suddenly, quote unquote, see our life in full vision. And, I have shared before that it felt like I suddenly looked up from this cloud, from this numbed state, and thought, oh boy, how did I get here? How did my life get to this level of dysfunction? And I wasn't seeing what was really happening. Instead, I was choosing to look away. And my weapon of choice, my self care, if you will, although it was a crappy self care tool, but my tool at the time was to use alcohol so that I didn't have to face all of the difficulties in my life. And so this idea of the five senses with vision or seeing is the beautiful opportunity, although sometimes it's challenging, right? Because we have to look at the messy and maybe some of the dysfunction, and maybe there might be some pain or sorrow there, but we actually get to we get to turn our attention, our vision to what's really happening. And it's so beautiful because then we can start to explore, how do I create the life I want and deserve? And so our vision for this beautiful, bright future is so enhanced when we let go of alcohol. And certainly when we think about hearing, I was the queen of kind of not hearing some of the truths in my life. And also, I think what comes to mind for me is this idea of that critical voice. I was constantly hearing this negative self talk, beating myself up, disappointed in myself, feeling and carrying that shame and guilt. And that voice was loud. And so, as we think about the idea of hearing in a new way when we're alcohol free, we have again this beautiful gift and opportunity to really listen. Listen to that voice in our head and bring awareness to the things we're saying to ourselves that might be keeping us stuck in that negative loop. And we have the opportunity to listen in new ways. And we can focus our attention on the good. We have something in the brain called the reticular activating system, and that is what we pay attention to. We suddenly, it's in our it's part of our senses. So we're seeing and hearing more of the good. And so, in this idea of how we turn our ear toward what's really happening, communication is such a beautiful gift in this alcohol free journey. As I think many adults, I was really stuck in a terrible communication style. I already said that, I wanted to look away from the difficult parts of my life. I also wanted to turn down the volume on the things that people were really saying, the hard things that I didn't want to hear. And I also stopped listening to the people in my life. I stopped really listening. And that was a place where when I stopped drinking alcohol, I started being able to listen, even to the parts that were somewhat painful. But hearing people share, what they really needed from me, what they hadn't been getting from me, where I had been not showing up, and what they would hope lovingly that I would do better. And so, this beautiful idea of hearing and listening, I think, can really be shifted when we step away from alcohol. And it's just another example of how these five senses can mean so much more. And so, I hope that as you consider hearing, you'll think about both that negative voice and shifting that around, bringing awareness to what you're really saying to yourself, tuning in, and then not tuning out, but adjusting that voice. And then also being more present and open and really listening to other people's needs, other people's ideas. And to me, this just opened up the communication. And it's not perfect, but my communication style has shifted and changed for the better in so many ways. And hearing and listening has been a big part of that. And so, as we think about smell, this is just another way that we can start to be engaged and present. One of the things that so many people learn and strive for on this alcohol free journey is to be more engaged in the present moment. Like so many humans, I too can get caught up in worry, which is the future, and rumination, which is the past. And so grounding in the present can be very connected to smell. And a couple of years ago, I actually had a friend that I met in nutrition school come into the podcast and we talked about essential oils. And so her essential oils, vibrant blue oils, you can go back. I'll link that episode in the show notes. And when I had this conversation with my friend Jody, we really talked about this idea of sense of smell. And it's another way to ground ourselves in the present moment. There's lots of ways we can do it, but let's use this enhanced beautiful sense of smell to consider how can I be more connected to the present moment. A smell is something you can remember or think about, but mostly it's something that hits you out of nowhere, or you intentionally smell something that brings you right into where you are right now. I find that alcohol free, I am more likely to literally stop and smell the roses, the flowers, and breathe in the scent, knowing that I am right here in the present moment, alive and able to smell. So I hope you will consider some new ways to use your enhanced sense of smell as you move away from alcohol and enjoy how it can bring you more of that connection to the new normal, the new you. And as we talk about touch, one of the things that I think is really powerful is the idea of human connection and connection to self. One of the things I work with clients with from time to time, depending upon their own journey, is being more connected to other people, human touch. We know that it's been said the opposite of addiction is connection. And sometimes we're really missing out on human touch. This is particularly true for some of my audience in who listen to this podcast, and this might be you. You might be a older woman who is divorced or widowed, and you're not getting a lot of physical touch. And so, as we have this enhanced ability to self soothe, we can use physical touch through giving ourselves a hug, stroking our arms. There's actually a body of somatic therapy called havening, Havening. And I've explored it a little bit, but it is part of that self-soothing touch. And then certainly things like getting a massage feels different when you're alcohol free. Having a pedicure feels different when you're alcohol free. And certainly that sensual and even sexual pleasure that comes from touch is enhanced. Often we have been removed from that sensation of physical touch. And I invite you to explore the beauty of touch as we move away from alcohol and think about where we can get in touch with ourselves, both physically and figuratively. And then, of course, taste. So when we think about taste, I want to think about living this big, juicy life, as my friend and colleague Martha Wright says. I talked about the Sober Edge Book Club already, but our very first book was called The Sober Lush. And part of it was exploring the sensory beauty of living an alcohol free life. And so, as a self identified foodie and as a nutritionist, I love to think about how taste can enhance the beauty of life. And so, part of what inspired me to want to read Life in Five Senses was just the idea of how do we continue to increase our vibrancy and our pleasure and our enjoyment and satisfaction of life through our five senses. What could we explore? And certainly when it comes to taste, as I talked about, our buds are dulled when we're drinking alcohol. And so as our taste buds come back, we can start to explore healthy, delicious foods that really satisfy in a way that alcohol never did. And also, using our beautiful taste buds to have pleasure and enjoyment when it comes to drinking something that's not alcohol. I love vinegar and something tart. So do a kombucha tasting and, try some shrubs, which are vinegar based. There's so many beautiful drinks out there now. Explore some mocktails, perhaps. See what lights up your sense of taste and enhances this alcohol free journey for you in new ways. And so I just think there's so much beauty in considering how our five senses are coming back to a full state as we are starting to get back in touch with the most powerful parts of ourself, be it through seeing differently, hearing and listening in new ways, enhancing our sense of touch and really getting back in touch with our own emotions and sensations. And then the beauty of smell and, what we are noticing throughout our five senses is a beautiful part of this journey. So I hope you will consider going down this path with me and noticing how you can use this knowledge of your five senses and celebrate how powerful your body is, how powerful your brain is, and really celebrate the healing that's taking place and this new awareness that we have that is such a gift in our daily life. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Sober Edge podcast. I will be back in 2 weeks with another edition of the podcast. And please reach out to me at thesobernutritionist.com. Share your biggest takeaways from this episode. And if you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend. Thank you.
I want to thank you for tuning in to the Sober Edge podcast. This is a place for important conversations and a safe place to question everything you thought you knew about drinking. If you're looking for your sober edge, I want to invite you to connect with me at thesobernutritionist.com, where you can grab my free resource, Becoming More, a guide to loving your sober life. And I would be so grateful if you enjoyed this podcast, if you would leave a rating and review, as it will help more people find their sober edge.